In this video, we are going on a journey back in time to Bucks Row in Whitechapel on August 31st, 1888, the day on which the murder of Mary Nichols, who is widely regarded as having been the first victim of the killer we now know as Jack the Ripper, took place. I say it's a journey back in time because I'm going to present you with a selection of newspaper reports that appeared in the hours, days and weeks that followed the murder, in which 4 witnesses, Police Constable John Neil, carman Robert Paul, Police Constable Jonas Mizen and carman Charles Cross gave their accounts of exactly what they saw in Bucks Row in the early hours of that morning. So without further ado, sit back and let's begin our journey into Victorian Whitechapel. In the early hours of the morning of Friday the 31st of August, 1888, the body of a woman was discovered in a gateway on Bucks Row in Whitechapel. It soon became apparent that an atrocious murder had occurred, and within a few hours this nondescript thoroughfare had become the scene of an intense police operation. One of the most important initial aspects of that investigation was establishing the victim's identity, and to that end her face was photographed at the mortuary and copies of the image were taken around the district by police officers and shown to diverse people in the hope that somebody would be able to identify her. This soon paid off, as several residents from a common lodging house in Thrall Street recognised her as a woman they knew as Polly, who had been residing there for several weeks. They were taken to the mortuary, and on viewing the body they confirmed that this was indeed their fellow lodger. Meanwhile, a close examination of the victim's petticoats had revealed the mark of the Lambeth workhouse, and later that day detectives made their way there, and the victim was named as Mary Nichols. As far as the press accounts of the murder published that day were concerned, the body had been found by Police Constable John Neil as he was walking his beat along Bucks Row at around 3:45 that morning. However, at least one journalist was disabused of this notion on the Friday evening when he encountered a man by the name of Robert Paul, who was making his way home along Bucks Row, having spent the day working as a carman, making deliveries around London. Paul told the reporter, who worked for Lloyd's weekly newspaper, a different story about the discovery of the body than the official version that was then circulating. Lloyd's published what it termed his remarkable statement in its edition of Sunday the 2nd of September. On Friday night, Mr. Robert Paul, a carman, on his return from work, made the following statement to our representative. He said,
"It was exactly 3:15 when I passed up Bucks Row to my work as a carman for Covent Garden Market. It was dark, and I was hurrying along when I saw a man standing where the woman was. He came a little towards me, but as I knew the dangerous character of the locality, I tried to give him a wide berth. Few people like to come up and down here without being on their guard, for there are such terrible gangs about. There have been many knocked down and robbed at that spot. The man, however, came towards me and said, 'Come and look at this woman.' I went and found the woman lying on her back. I laid hold of her wrist and found that she was dead and the hands cold. It was too dark to see the blood about her. I thought that she had been outraged and had died in the struggle. I was obliged to be punctual at my work, so I went on and told the other man I would send the first policeman I saw. I saw one in Church Row, just at the top of Bucks Row, who was going round calling people up, and I told him what I had seen and asked him to come, but he did not say whether he should come or not. He continued calling the people up, which I thought was a great shame after I had told him the woman was dead. The woman was so cold that she must have been dead some time, and either she had been lying there, left to die, or she must have been murdered somewhere else and carried there. If she had been lying there long enough to get so cold as she was when I saw her, it shows that no policeman on the beat had been down there for a long time. If a policeman had been there, he must have seen her, for she was plain enough to see. Her bonnet was lying about 2 feet from her head."
However, the Lloyd's article wouldn't appear for another 2 days, and the inquest into the death of Mary Nichols opened at 1 o'clock on the afternoon of Saturday the 1st of September, here at the Working Lads Institute on Whitechapel Road. The first thing the jury did was head off to view the body at the mortuary, and having done so, they returned to the Working Lads Institute, where the first witness, Mr. Edward Walker, identified the victim as his daughter, Mary Nichols. He then provided a synopsis of her life. I have done a separate video on the life and death of Mary Nichols, and I'll put a link to it in the description below. Having established the identity of the victim, the inquest then concerned itself with the finding of the body, and to that end, Police Constable Neil was called, as despite Robert Pool's statement to the journalist, the official line was still that it was Neil who had found the body. The Evening Standard published his testimony in that day's edition. The next witness was John Neil, Police Constable 97J, who said,
"Yesterday morning I was proceeding down Bucks Row, Whitechapel, going towards Brady Street. There was not a soul about. I had been round there half an hour previous, and I saw no one then. I was on the right side of the street when I noticed a figure lying in the street. It was dark at the time, though there was a street lamp shining at the end of the row. I went across and found deceased lying outside a gateway, her head towards the east. The gateway was closed. It was about 9 or 10 feet high and led to some stables. There were houses from the gateway eastward, and the school board school occupies the westward. On the opposite side of the road is Essex Wharf. Deceased was lying lengthways across the street, her hand touching the gate. I examined the body by the aid of my lamp and noticed blood oozing from a wound in the throat. She was lying on her back with her clothes disarranged. I felt her arm, which was quite warm from the joints upwards. Her eyes were wide open. Her bonnet was off and lying at her side, close to the left hand. I heard a constable passing Brady Street, so I called him. I did not whistle. I said to him, 'Run at once for Dr. Llewellyn,' and seeing another constable in Baker's Row, I sent him for the ambulance. The doctor arrived in a very short time. I had in the meantime rung the bell at Essex Wharf and asked if any disturbance had been heard. The reply was no. Sergeant Kirby came after, and he knocked. The doctor looked at the woman and then said, 'Move the woman to the mortuary. She is dead, and I will make a further examination of her.' We then placed her on the ambulance and moved her there. Inspector Spratley came to the mortuary, and while taking a description of the deceased, turned up her clothes and found that she was disembowelled. This had not been noticed by any of them before. On the body was found a piece of comb and a bit of looking-glass. No money was found, but an unmarked white handkerchief was found in her pocket.
At this point, the coroner, Edwin Baxter, began quizzing the constable.
"Did you notice any blood where she was found?"
There was a pool of blood just where the neck was lying. The blood was then running from the wound in her neck.
"Did you hear any noise that night?"
No, I heard nothing. The farthest I had been that night was just through Whitechapel Road and up Baker's Row. I was never far away from the spot.
Whitechapel Road is busy in the early morning, I believe. Could anybody have escaped that way?
Oh, yes, sir. I saw a number of women in the main road going home. At that time, anyone could have got away.
I believe someone searched the ground.
Yes, I examined it while the doctor was being sent for.
At this point, Inspector Spratley interjected, "I examined the road, sir, in daylight." At the time, there were rumours in the press that the murder had taken place elsewhere and the body had been brought to the spot in Bucks Row on a carriage or cart. A juryman therefore asked Neil, "Did you see a trap in the road at all?"
No.
The juryman persevered. "Knowing that the body was warm, did it not strike you that it might just have been laid there and that the woman was killed elsewhere?"
No. I examined the road but did not see the mark of the wheels. The first to arrive on the scene after I had discovered the body were 2 men who work at a slaughterhouse opposite. They said that they knew nothing of the affair and that they had not heard any screams. I had previously seen the men at work. That would be about 3:15 or half an hour before I found the body.
And with that, Constable Neil's evidence concluded. Of course, his testimony contradicted the claim that Robert Pool had made to the representative from Lloyd's newspaper the previous night, and the newspaper therefore sought clarification from Pool, who was emphatic that his version was the correct one. Lloyd's newspaper published his rebuttal elsewhere in its pages in its Sunday edition. Mr. Pool last night repeated the statement made to our representative on Friday evening that he and another man found the corpse long before the police. He says the policeman he spoke to was not belonging to that beat. Every word he said was true. Of course, this raised the question, who was the other man that Robert Pool spoke of, since, according to Pool's remarkable statement, it was this man who had found the body in Bucks Row. The second day of the inquest opened on the morning of Monday the 3rd of September, by which time the other man had been identified as Charles Cross, and he appeared at the inquest that morning. However, before he gave his testimony, the inquest heard from Police Constable Meisen, the officer to whom, so Robert Paul had claimed in his remarkable statement, he and the other man had reported their discovery. The Evening Standard gave an account of Meisen's testimony in that night's edition, albeit they managed to misspell Meisen's surname as well as getting his first name wrong, as it was in fact Jonas, not George, as reported in the article. Police Constable Meisen, 55H, said, "On Friday morning last at 4:20, I was at the end of Hanbury Street, Baker's Row, when someone who was passing said, 'You're wanted down there,' pointing to Bucks Row. The man appeared to be a carman. The man, whose name is George Cross, was brought in, and the witness identified him as the man who spoke to him on the morning in question. I went up Bucks Row and saw a policeman shining his light on the pavement. He said, 'Go for an ambulance,' and I at once went to the station and returned with it. The blood appeared fresh and was still running from the neck of the woman." The coroner asked, "There was another man in company with Cross?" The witness replied, "Yes, I think he was also a carman." The interesting thing about this article is that it was either a syndicated piece or was widely copied, as this exact account, complete with the misspellings and misnamings, appeared word for word in several newspapers the next morning, most notably in the Morning Advertiser. It is also a truncated account of proceedings, as we know from other newspaper accounts that Meisen stated that Cross had told him that he was wanted by another policeman in Bucks Row. It is also apparent that at least one member of the jury had read Robert Paul's remarkable statement, as Meisen was questioned about one of the accusations in it. According to the East London Observer, in its edition of Saturday the 8th of September, Police Constable Meisen said that about 4:45 on Friday morning he was at the corner of Hanbury Street and Baker's Row when a carman, passing in the company with another man, said, 'You are wanted in Bucks Row by a policeman. A woman is lying there.' The witness went to Bucks Row when Police Constable Neil sent him for an ambulance. At that time, nobody but Neil was with the body. On returning with the ambulance, he helped put the deceased upon it. A juryman quizzed him, 'Did you continue knocking people up after Cross told you you were wanted?' 'No, I only finished knocking up one person,' Meisen replied. And with that, Police Constable Meisen stood down, and the next witness was called. This witness was Charles Allen Cross, the man who had actually found the body in Bucks Row. He appears to have given a fairly detailed account of his actions that morning, albeit the reports in the newspapers of his testimony do contain errors. According to the account in the Evening Standard, which appeared later on the day on which he gave his evidence, Charles Allen Cross, a carman in the employ of Messrs. Pickford, said on Friday morning I left home at 3:30. I went down Parson Street, crossed Brady Street and through Bucks Row. I was alone. As I got up Bucks Row, I saw something lying on the north side in the gateway to a wool warehouse. It looked to me like a man's tarpaulin, but on going into the centre of the road, I saw it was the figure of a woman. At the same time, I heard a man coming up the street in the same direction as I had done, so I waited for him to come up. When he came up, I said, 'Come and look over here. There is a woman.' We then both went over to the body. I bent over her head and touched her hand, which was cold. I said, 'She is dead.' The other man, after he had felt her heart, said, 'Yes, she is.' He then suggested that we should shift her, but I said, 'No, let us go and tell the policeman.' When I found her, her clothes were up above her knees. We tried to pull them over her, but they did not seem as if they would come down. I did not notice any blood. The coroner asked him, 'Did you not see that her throat was cut?' Cross replied, 'No, it was very dark at the time.' We left together and went up Baker's Row, where we met a constable. I said to him, 'There is a woman in Bucks Row on the broad of her back. She is dead or else drunk.' The constable said he would go, and I left him and went on to work. 'Did you see Police Constable Neil about?' enquired the coroner. Cross replied, 'No, I did not see anyone at all except the constable I spoke to. I don't think I met anybody after I left my house till I got to the body.' As mentioned earlier, this account of Cross's testimony was repeated verbatim in several newspapers the next morning, suggesting that it was a syndicated piece. There are several discrepancies in this account. To begin with, he mentions that his route to Bucks Row took him along Parson Street, whereas no Parson Street actually existed in the locality. Secondly, he mentions that the body was lying in the gateway to a wool warehouse, whereas other newspapers that either used a different press agency or had their own reporters present at the inquest, such as the Echo of the 3rd of September, quoted him as saying that he was by the gateway of the wool warehouse when he saw someone lying in the gateway, so he walked into the centre of the road and saw that it was a woman. The Morning Advertiser, in its edition of Tuesday the 4th of September, even managed to get the type of the warehouse wrong. Although the article is evidently the same one that appeared in the previous day's Standard and in other newspapers on the 4th, the Advertiser informed its readers that he had said, "As I got up Bucks Row, I saw something lying on the north side in the gateway to a tool warehouse." Since this article is essentially a verbatim copy of the one that appeared in the previous day's Standard and in other newspapers on the 4th, all of which printed as a wool warehouse, it is safe to assume that tool was a misprint of wool on the part of the Morning Advertiser. Of course, since as the saying goes, assumption is the mother of all mistakes, I'll simply present a selection of copies of the article as it appeared in the various newspapers, starting with the Evening Standard, and I'll leave viewers to decide whether or not the Morning Advertiser's tool warehouse was a typo on their part. Another inquest exchange that was omitted from the Standard article occurred between Cross and a juryman, the latter of which noticed that Cross's account of what he had told Meisen was at odds with what Meisen testified he had been told by Cross, that is, that he was wanted in Bucks Row by another policeman, whereas Cross had testified that he simply informed him, "There is a woman in Bucks Row on the broad of her back. She is dead or else drunk." The East London Observer published the exchange in its Saturday the 8th of September issue. A juryman asked Cross if he had told Constable Meisen that another policeman wanted him in Bucks Row. "No," was Charles Cross's reported reply, "because I did not see a policeman in Bucks Row." Somewhere in the background, whilst all this was taking place, was the other person who had been present in Bucks Row when the body was found, Robert Paul. Paul's remarkable statement had certainly ruffled Constable Meisen's feathers, as Paul had been critical of the fact that the officer had continued calling people up after he had told him what he had seen in Bucks Row, which Paul said was a great shame after he had told Meisen the woman was dead. However, both Meisen and Cross's inquest testimonies had made it clear that it wasn't Robert Paul who had informed the constable of what they had found in Bucks Row, but Charles Cross. Now, it must be borne in mind that the remarkable statement was not in any way an official statement. It had been given to a reporter from Lloyd's who Robert Paul met as he made his way home on the night of Friday the 31st of August. We don't know how much of it was actually in Robert Paul's own words, or how much of it was either added or embellished by the journalist. But the important thing is that Robert Paul was not making an official statement, nor was he making it under oath. That changed on the afternoon of Monday the 17th of September, when the coroner, Edwin Baxter, resumed the inquest into Mary Nichols' death at the Working Lads Institute, and Robert Paul was at last called to give on oath his version of the events on the morning of the 31st of August. As is the case with virtually all the inquest testimonies for almost all the victims, the official records are no longer available for scrutiny, so we have to rely on the newspaper reports to ascertain what the various witnesses said. On the whole, these are pretty consistent, albeit, as we have seen, errors and misspellings did creep in, largely because the reporters were taking down what the witnesses were saying as they heard them, and they might have misheard what was said. Robert Paul is the perfect example of this, because several newspapers got his name wrong and referred to him as Robert Ball. This is perhaps forgivable in the case of newspapers such as the Times. However, even Lloyd's weekly newspaper, which had previously published his remarkable statement, managed to refer to him as Robert Ball when reporting his inquest testimony. Aside from the name issue, Paul's evidence is not particularly illuminating, as, being under oath, he didn't repeat some of his earlier claims that apparently exaggerated his involvement in the events. His testimony is mainly of importance because he is more exact on exactly where Cross was standing when he first noticed him. According to the Times, Robert Ball, a carman of 30 Foster Street, Whitechapel, stated he went to work at Cobbett's Court, Spitalfields. He left home about 3:15 on the Friday morning, and as he was passing up Bucks Row, he saw a man standing in the middle of the road. As witness approached him, he walked towards the pavement, and witness stepped onto the roadway in order to pass him. He then touched witness on the shoulder and said, "Come and look at this woman here." Witness went with him and saw a woman lying right across the gateway. Her clothes were raised almost up to her stomach. Witness felt her hands and face, and they were cold. He knelt down to see if he could hear her breathe, but could not, and he thought she was dead. It was very dark, and he did not notice any blood. They agreed that the best thing they could do would be to tell the first policeman they met. He could not see whether the clothes were torn and did not feel any other part of the body except the hands and face. They looked to see if there was a constable, but one was not to be seen. While he was pulling the clothes down, he touched the breast and then fancied he felt a slight movement. The coroner asked him about the temperature at the time. The morning was rather a chilly one. Witness and the other man walked on together until they met a policeman at the corner of Old Montague Street and told him what they had seen. Up to that time, not more than 4 minutes had elapsed from the time he saw the body. He had not met anyone before he reached Bucks Row and did not see anyone running away. And with that, the protagonists in this part of the story shuffled off into relative obscurity. Mary Nichols was laid to rest in the City of London Cemetery on Thursday the 6th of September 1888, and although the precise site of her grave has long since disappeared, a memorial plaque in the cemetery now remembers her. Constable Neil would retire from the Metropolitan Police in 1897, following an injury received whilst on duty. Constable Jonas Mizen retired from the force in 1899. Robert Paul settled back into the obscurity of family life. As for Charles Cross, well, for over 100 years he was simply known for being the man who found the body of Mary Nichols, the first victim of Jack the Ripper. But in the early 2000s, researchers went looking for him and discovered that his name was in fact Charles Lechmere. Since then, he has rocketed to the top of the pile of Jack the Ripper suspects as a dedicated team strived to prove that he was not only responsible for the Jack the Ripper murders, but was also the man who carried out the Thames Torso murders, as well as other murders that took place around that time. There is even talk of human remains being secreted in the drains and sewers around Doveton Street where he lived. In 2014, he was given the honour of featuring in his own documentary, The Missing Evidence, in which the case against him was presented using the limited number of actual facts we have about him, the majority of which are gleaned from the newspaper articles that I have quoted from in this video. Those who favour him as the culprit responsible for the Whitechapel murders argue that he gave a false name to throw the authorities off his trail. Others who discount him as a suspect point out that, since his stepfather was named Cross and he appears in the 1861 census as Charles Cross, then Charles Cross wasn't a false name. He is also probably the Charles Cross who said he worked for Pickford's, who gave that name when testifying at the inquest into the death of a young boy who he had accidentally run down whilst making deliveries in 1876. And let's not forget, not only did he give the name Charles Cross at the inquest into the death of Mary Nichols, but he also stated that he worked for Pickford's and had done so for many years. Plus, he evidently gave his home address of 22 Doveton Street to the inquest, as the Star newspaper reported this address in its edition of Monday the 3rd of September 1888, whilst reporting his evidence from that day. It is argued by those who propose him that he was a reluctant witness who didn't come forward for several days when he was forced into action by Robert Paul's remarkable statement. This is countered by those who defend him, who point out that he appeared on the second day of the inquest directly after Constable Meisen. Meisen even identified him as the man who had alerted him to the murder. Robert Paul's remarkable statement and inquest testimony are used by proponents of Lechmere to proffer that, and this often appears in the comment section of the videos on this channel, he found Charles Cross standing by the body, and one poster repeats over and over again that Cross or Lechmere was lingering and acting suspiciously by the body. Let's just take a look at the definition of lingering. According to Collins' dictionary, it means to remain or stay in a place longer than is usual or expected, as if from reluctance to leave. In neither his remarkable statement nor his inquest testimony does Robert Paul state that this is what Charles Cross was doing. In his remarkable statement he says, "It was dark and I was hurrying along when I saw a man standing where the woman was." In his inquest testimony, made under oath, according to the Times, he stated that he left home about 3:45 on Friday morning, and as he was passing up Bucks Row, he saw a man standing in the middle of the road. There is no mention of him lingering, and certainly no mention of him acting suspiciously. Indeed, Robert Paul's testimony actually backs up what Charles Cross said happened. These are the facts that have been used to build the case against him, with commentators then interpreting, exaggerating, or even twisting them to bolster their argument. With the disappearance of the official transcripts and police reports, we are dependent on the newspapers for the accounts of what happened and who said and did what. These are often contradictory, and many things were misreported or truncated, but they are the only records we have of what occurred, so we have no choice but to use them, although we must treat them with caution and not expand on them to fit our own agendas. These are the facts we have, and as such they are the evidence on which cases can be built. Whether this evidence was ever missing, well, I'll leave you, dear viewer, to decide.